Welcome back to the Fantasy Hedger. I'm Dr. John Brower, and this is my second tutorial video for my website, FFHedge.com. In this video, I want to walk you through how I use the website to make start-sit decisions. And to do that, rather than walking you through a list of the specific tools and some of the complicated features of the site, I just want to go through a simple example in detail so you have a sense of how you can bring information to the site and then use the site to add to that information to maximize the chances that you're going to gain expected value or make a rational pick when deciding who to start any given week. So let's consider week 17 last year. For many people, that's our fantasy football championship week. And this is when the stakes are highest for making those decisions. Now, you may have been facing a tough call for your RB2 or running back 2 roster spot. You might have had, let's say, two guys like Kenneth Gainwell and Travian Henderson, and you're trying to decide who to pick. Now, these two kind of profile differently, and this is a real decision that a lot of people had to make. So this is, I think, a really good one to illustrate how the website might be able to help you in making these kinds of start-sit calls. Now, let's start with each player individually by going to the projections pages. Let's start with Kenneth Gainwell. Many experts had him in week 17 as a solid RB2 with an RB1 upside. In other words, this is somebody who a lot of expert sites were saying could really help you win the week. And that's reflected in the expert consensus ranking of 17. Now, if we look at the roster slot for RB2 and keeping everything at the default here, Gainwell had roughly 50-50 chance of, according to the experts, of essentially hitting the floor that we want of 10 points for this position. He had only a 1 in 3 chance, according to the data, of hitting that same floor, or in other words, a 2 in 3 chance of busting. The chances of actually being a league winner for us, roughly 1 in 4, according to the experts, roughly 15%, according to the data. Remember that the data are weighing both player usage statistics and game environment statistics. Now let's talk a little bit about that game environment. Gainwell was playing for Pittsburgh at the time. Steelers were a slight 3-point road favorite with one of the lowest over-under totals of the week at 34.5. So this is projecting as a low-scoring grinder game with high uncertainty about the game script for the two running backs, Gainwell and Jaylen Warren. The receptions in PPR leagues would typically offer a safer floor for Gainwell, and so it's understandable why experts were pretty bullish on him, given his recent performances. Now let's talk about Travian Henderson. Here, expert consensus ranking is 51, but that's deceiving. Henderson was coming off a head injury, and it was unclear whether or not he was going to start, making him a particularly risky start for the championship week. Henderson started the year off slow, and then really came on towards the end. He dominated early down carries. He was a workhorse when Ramondre Stevenson was banged up, but virtually all the receiving targets were going to Stevenson when they were both playing. In week 17, Stevenson was a very popular addition to start-sit columns, as experts were banking on the possibility that Henderson might be out and Stevenson might get a full workload. Now let's talk about the game environment a little bit here. The over-under for the New England Jets game was relatively modest, middle of the road, projected at 42.5 points. But New England was a heavy 12.5 favorite. This projects for a strong running back game script, particularly for an early down workhorse back that's going to get a lot of carries when a team is leading the game. Now let's compare the players head to head using our start sit tool. Select running back, pick your two players, pick the roster spot, in this case RB2. Right now we'll leave everything else at defaults, and we'll compare week 17 Kenneth Gainwell versus Travian Henderson. The first thing you might notice is this is an example of a coin flip. When we look at the chances that these players are going to hit their floors, target, or ceiling scores, they're roughly equivalent. If you were faced with this decision in the championship week of last year, this was a legitimately tough call. If you're only going on expert consensus rankings and don't know much about fantasy football, well, you're probably not using this site. And you probably easily or quickly went to Gainwell, given the drastic differences in the expert consensus rankings here. But since you're here, it's probably not what you're doing, and you're wondering, what the heck do I do in a situation like this? There's not an obvious answer here, but there's one that I prefer in these types of situations. Now, if you're considering Henderson last year for championship week, you're watching the news closely to see if he's actually going to play or if he's going to be out due to that head injury. If he's out, the answer is obvious. You're going to go with Gainwell. And the expert signal here which has already priced in that injury risk, is going to lean heavily in Gainwell's favor as well. However, if Henderson's playing, the data tell a different story. Considering just player usage and game environment statistics, there's an obvious advantage for Henderson. Sure, Kenneth Gainwell has a higher PPR floor and is the safer play. But we're playing for a championship here, and you don't want the safe floor. You want the game-winning upside of somebody like Henderson who might get 15 to 20 carries in a game that they're projected to be up by 12 points or more at the end. In that situation, give me that league-winning upside any day of the week. From the data model in this case, there's a clear winner. Henderson is almost 3 times as likely to hit that ceiling as Gainwell if we're just looking at the data signal alone and we're assuming that he plays. Now, hindsight's 2020, but let's do an autopsy of what actually happened. Gainwell ended with 7 carries for 26 yards and another 3 receptions for 12 yards in a 6-13 loss to Cleveland. New England ended up beating their over-under in a 42-10 blowout. Henderson ended with 19 carries for 82 yards. All the targets went to Stevenson. Now, he didn't hit a touchdown, which is what kept that overall score below those target and ceiling values that we were hoping for. But remember, in fantasy football, those kinds of outcomes, like long runs and touchdowns, are volatile and highly unpredictable. We want those to happen and we want to predict them, but those aren't the things that should be the primary drivers of our decisions. Rather, we want to develop and stick to a process that maximizes expected value over the long run. And in this case, that would involve weighing 2 players, both of whom were good picks, rejecting that expert consensus ranking, and going with the RB1 candidate that the data say has the best chances of helping you win that particular week.